All right, everybody, what is going on? Welcome back to the channel. Now is as good a time as any to give you the definitive tier list for the 2024 baseball season. We have to start with the top. We have to start with one of the teams that I think a lot of people, myself included, had really being one of the better teams in all of baseball and playing a big 3-game series against the Yankees. That is, of course, the Baltimore Orioles, coming in at one of our World Series favorites. The Orioles have been really, really good this season. I haven't really seen any flaws in their team as far as being a good regular season team. If I was an Orioles fan, I would want the front office to go after starting pitching because the big trade for Corbin Burnes has paid dividends. Everyone else behind him, not so much. It hasn't been that kind of cohesive unit on the mound outside of Corbin Burnes. And by that, I mean, it's kind of not having the level of production to match someone who's going to be one of the top choices for Cy Young Award in the American League this year. That said, the lineup's really good. Gunnar Henderson's one of the top MVP candidates in the American League this year. I wouldn't be concerned about where the Orioles are at. I would be very happy with where they're at, and the Orioles are playing really good baseball. I would want to see the Orioles get a little bit stronger, but for right now, they are one of the best teams in baseball. Next team on this list, best record in baseball, best record in the National League. This is, of course, the Philadelphia Phillies. The Phillies have been one of the best teams in baseball for the better part of the season. They started off the year losing a series at home to Atlanta, but since then, it feels like they've won basically every single day. There doesn't feel like there's going to be a series where they're completely out of it. There's overmatched. 4 guys in the rotation, I believe it is, have a sub-3 ERA. The 3 guys with a sub-3, at least Aaron Nola with like a 3.5. Really, really good numbers from the Phillies all around this year. Everyone's contributing. Harper's missed some time. Turner's missed some time. They haven't missed a beat. It's 8.5 or 9.5 games up on the Braves going into the weekend before the All-Star break. There's no reason to believe they won't be competing for the National League pennant this year. They are as good as we think they are, if not better. But the third team and final team in this World Series favorites tier is the Los Angeles Dodgers. Now, we all know about the Dodgers. They're going to be aggressive at the trade deadline. They're going to go out and make the team stronger, and that's just kind of the way they've operated over the last 8 or 9 years. They've been aggressive at the deadline. They're going to be aggressive at the deadline again this year. Ohtani is Ohtani, and obviously missing Mookie Betts has been painful, and they've missed a lot of time from guys in the rotation. Yamamoto's on the shelf, Glasnow's on the shelf right before the break. Would shock no one if they went out and got a top-tier starting pitcher while simultaneously holding on to some of their elite talent, because they have, again, more elite talent in the minors. Just the way the Dodgers have developed and drafted and put together a winning ball club top to bottom is thoroughly impressive. I like the Dodgers in this tier, so Dodgers, Phillies, Orioles as the top 3 teams, the World Series favorites going into the All-Star break. So now we're going to take a look at teams that are kind of elite, division winners, first wildcard teams, but not quite the same breadth as those top 3. And we're going to start with a team that actually has the best record in the American League in the Cleveland Guardians by a few percentage points over the Orioles. So the reason I'm putting the Orioles above the Guardians is mostly to do with the fact that we've seen the Guardians effectively outperform a lot of what we would expect from them, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. Losing Shane Bieber is going to have more of an impact, I think, on the second half of the season than in the first half. It just speaks to how tough it is to win a division as good as the Central has been. The 3 teams in that division are most likely going to make the postseason in the American League, between the Guardians, the Twins, and the Royals. 3 really solid ball clubs. We'll get to those 2 in a second. But Guardians, both sides of the ball, really, really solid. Playing really good baseball. I just don't know that offensively they have the same sort of depth that other teams have. David Fry, I think, who's had a really good first half, is starting to regress a little bit, so I wouldn't be shocked to see the Guardians kind of fall off the pace a little bit, but they've been playing really good baseball, so credit to them. Let's talk about the Twins next then, because I have them kind of right there next to the Guardians. I think this could come down to the last week or so of the season, just because I feel like these two are very evenly matched. I saw the Twins play against the Mariners a couple weeks ago, and there's a lot to like about watching the Twins go about their business. Really, really solid on both sides of the ball. The rotation is good. The back end of the bullpen is good. Offense is going to do what it's going to do. The only question marks I have for the Twins are kind of the health of the Byron Buxtons and the Royce Lewises of the world. Other than that, they had that horrific start to the season, but really since then, they've been playing good baseball. And I wouldn't be shocked to see them be also aggressive at the deadline and go out and get a couple pieces to supplement that offense, and maybe even in the rotation or the bullpen as well. So Twins, Guardians, both looking really, really solid. Next in this kind of elite tier, these really, really good teams, is offensively, the Mariners are not that good. They are one of the worst offenses in baseball. I think they lead the league in strikeout percentage, lowest batting average. They don't score a lot of runs. The reason they are so good and the reason they are on top of the AL West right now is on the heels of that pitching staff, which has been phenomenal. Logan Gilbert's an all-star. George Kirby, phenomenal. Brian Wu, young talent, really good. Bryce Miller, a lot of potential. And Luis Castillo, LaRock. I mean, the dude is filthy. So when you build a rotation the way the Mariners have, you have a lot of reason to believe that, like, yeah, you can win a close game. You can win a game that's 2-1 where offense is going to be at a premium. A lot of things to like about the Mariners going into the second half. They go out and get a bat in the deadline, and the Mariners could be a very, very dangerous team. So I really like where the Mariners are headed, and I think we're in for a really, really interesting trade deadline for the AL West. And we can't talk about the AL West, of course, without talking about the Houston Astros. Went to the ALCS last year and the year before. And the year before, and every year since 2017, the Astros are going to be there. They're going to be relevant. They're going to be one of the better teams in baseball. I know when they got off to that horrific start earlier in the year, a lot of folks were like, oh, the Astros just aren't the same. But the reality is, they're still a very good ball club, and they still have a lot of talent on both sides of the ball, and they still have the ability to go out and produce. They went out and got Josh Hader, who hasn't had a great year, but realistically, you want to turn the ball over to someone in the ninth. Josh Hader's one of the best options in baseball. So the Astros are going to be relevant as much as we don't really want to see that. They're going to be really, really good. And I think that the AL West is going to come down to probably the last week of the season, just like it did last year. Last year, I think it was the final day or two, whatever, game 160 or 61 or whatever it was. It's going to be a nail biter, I think, in the AL West, which is good. We want to see really close division races because it makes for compelling baseball all the way through the end of September and into October. And I think the AL West is going to be one of those again. And rounding out this category is the New York Yankees. If you would have told me about 6 weeks ago the Yankees were not going to be kind of in that top tier World Series favorites, I probably would have raised an eyebrow because since the start of the year, they've been phenomenal. Aaron Judge looks like an MVP. Juan Soto is going to get north of $500 million in his free agent contract, either with the Yankees or with someone else. But they've been playing really good baseball. Up until the last little while, they've been playing very, very poorly over the last few weeks. Not a great stretch. Primarily just the fact that the offense outside of Judge and Soto hasn't really been there. And even so, I think Judge has regressed a little bit. It's just not quite the same sort of, this is the New York Yankees of April and May and June. They've taken a step back. They're not nearly as good as they were to start the year, and I think I would be a little bit concerned with the rotation. Rodon had a nice start to the year, but has crashed back down to earth. Garrett Cole has been kind of hit or miss since he's come back off the IL, or since he's really started the year. Of course, starting late with that elbow problem. And I just don't think that there's enough to convince me that the Yankees are really top to bottom worthy of that World Series favorite category, but still, they are one of the better teams in baseball. They're going to be relevant in the postseason again. If they don't win the East, they're going to be a wild card team. They're going to be a factor. It's just, they are the New York Yankees. They're not going to just roll over while the rest of the division gets better. One more team to add to this elite but not quite top tier, and that is, of course, the NL Central leading Milwaukee Brewers. I'm still on the fence as to where I want to put the Brewers because they are a really solid team, but I think that as far as being sustainable, there's a little bit of reliance on the bullpen. I think their bullpen usage is one of the top marks in baseball. Over the course of a long season, it will burn you out, and they don't have the same sort of star power in the rotation, of course, with Corbin Burns being in Baltimore. And I think for the Brewers, one of the things to keep in mind is the fact that they're kind of outperforming what we would think. They have a great bullpen, a solid rotation outside of Freddie Peralta. You would want to see a little more depth to, for me, consider them kind of a World Series favorite. And of course, they are going to feel a little disappointed that they didn't get farther than they did last year in the postseason. So this is an opportunity for them to kind of continue to progress, and Pat Murphy has shown to be a solid manager in his first full season. Again, you could put them in either this kind of elite or decent. I would, if I were to hedge, I would kind of put them in between those two tiers, but we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. They've looked really, really solid this year. I don't know how else to describe the Braves other than this year has been somewhere between a massive disappointment and kind of a revelation that the way this team is built and the approach this team has, or lack thereof, is not sustainable. And what I mean by that is you can look at some of the bat tracking metrics that we have on StatCast, and you look at the swing length and the whiff rate that the Braves have, And the vast majority of those hitters have above average swing speed, swing length, and whiff percentage. There's a lot of swing and miss, a lot of missing pitches in the strike zone, and that's kind of how they did things in 2021. Great, it worked out, but you can't rely on just channeling that sort of really good baseball towards the end of the year. For me, I'm just not convinced that the Braves offense is going to kind of flip a switch and just turn it around like that. This is also me on July 12th before the All-Star break. So who really knows between now and the end of the season, really? But, you know, they're going to be a wild card team, but I don't see them really having a chance to get past the Philadelphia or even the Dodgers for that matter. And say what you will about how the Dodgers played in October last year. They're a much different team this year. I just don't think the Braves are in that same conversation, and they're not even in the same conversation as some of the teams above. Not a convincing picture from the Braves, despite having one of the better rotations and better pitching staffs holistically in the game. It's been way too streaky, not just for my liking, but to be sustainable. And there hasn't been a stretch this year where the Braves have really been good. They've been so-so basically all year. Look, if they win 90 games, make the postseason, fine. But again, you go up in a short series against a team like the Phillies or the Dodgers who are going to hurt you offensively if you make mistakes. I mean, I think the Braves are one of the more aggressive teams in baseball, but they're also susceptible to really, really short innings, which doesn't tire other pitchers out, which is kind of what you would want to do in a short series, get into their bullpen and really see the same pitchers over and over to get some sort of familiarity and whatnot. Yeah, the Braves are what? They're 4-2 against the Phillies in 2 series this year. They're also 2-6 against the Nationals. They're going to lose to the Phillies again this year. I just have a feeling it's going to happen. So that's the Braves. Next on this list, funny enough, is the team that they're playing over the weekend down in San Diego. It is the Padres. I think with the Padres, it's an interesting one because they're very much a Jekyll and Hyde team in a lot of ways, like the Braves. They have the star power like Machado and Tatis, but they don't necessarily have the consistent production. There's a little bit of stalling right now, and you know they're going to be a wild card team probably, and I would still expect them to be relevant come October. And like the Braves, can they kind of put it together? Which is why I put them in this tier. Next in this tier, I'm going to put the Red Sox because they've been playing really, really good baseball of late. I think they're like 15-5 in their last 20 or something like that. Two out of 3 from the Yankees fairly recently at Yankee Stadium, and I think another 2 out of 3 from the Yankees at Fenway Park. So they've been playing good baseball. The only question for the Red Sox for me is the ownership going to step up and make moves to make the team better? Because consistently we haven't seen that sort of intent, especially since they traded Mookie Betts and since John Henry kind of declared to the world that like, yeah, I don't really care about whether or not this team wins as long as they're turning profit. And it seems like they are, so that's good from a business perspective. I don't know, man. I just think the Red Sox have a little bit of, you don't really know what to expect. One day they could be great and take 2 out of 3 from the Yankees, but another they could, struggle against some other teams in baseball that you wouldn't expect them to struggle against. And it's just a very inconsistent picture for the Red Sox. So I want to kind of preface this by saying I don't know what to make of the Royals. I would put them in this kind of 80-win wagon column. You would not expect them to be this good. There's bound to be a little bit of regression in the second half, but the pieces they have in place and what they've shown so far this season, if they get hot, like the D-backs did last year, you could see them making a run in the postseason. Because I think at the top of the rotation, Cole Reagans and Seth Lugo have been really, really good. It's just a question of the offense producing outside of Bobby Witt Jr., who's having a probably top 5 MVP season. Next 2 teams, I expected these both to be a lot better than they have been so far in 2024. We're going to start with the Giants because to me, they made some of the smartest acquisitions in the offseason, going and getting the Jorge Solers, the Matt Chapmans. They addressed the power issue. They addressed defense on the corners. They went and made themselves better. Then they got Blake Snell. I think the Giants are going to play better baseball in the second half. Partially because, they've basically gotten Chapman and Snell to adjust to their new surroundings, but also it's a long season, and getting that plus a new manager to all gel together and play good baseball day in and day out is tough. But I think if they get hot, they're not going to touch the Dodgers in the division. Like, I don't think the Padres will either. But if they get hot late in the season, they could be a legitimate factor. So on the pitching side, Logan Webb is throwing the ball like a Cy Young candidate should, like an ace should. It's just the question is outside of him, like, what are you going to get from Blake Snell? Because the numbers for Snell they've been bad so far this year. Not just so-so, they've been really, really bad. I think the last start, his first off the IL, was a step in the right direction, but again, I'm not convinced. I see the pieces there, and you see kind of how that can progress over the next little while. And then this is the other one. I thought the Reds were going to be a lot better than they were last year. I think what the Reds showed at this point last season was that the young core that they have is about to take that next step. Hunter Green has looked better this season than he did at some points last season. And of course, we can't talk about the Reds without talking about Ellie and how good he has been swiping bases. I mean, I think 100 steals is easily in the equation for the Reds this year. But outside of that, I think it's interesting that they are where they are, but I wouldn't be surprised, again, like the Giants, if they kind of show in the second half of the year, they're going to start playing a lot better baseball. The Central, I would say, in the National League is not so much there for the taking, but they can definitely put some pressure on the Brewers as we kind of get later into August and September. I'm not going to say they're going to win the division, but if they do, then my manager of the year pick in the National League looks really, really good. All right, so these next two tiers can kind of be flip-flopped any way you want to see it. I would put that all in the same general category. Teams that are trying to be good but are either bad or good for different reasons. And I think starting off this category, staying the NL Central, I do want to talk about the Cubs. So in the offseason, the Cubs added a couple pieces to what was already a decent, not great team, but a decent enough team with some good young talent, adding veterans like Dansby Swanson, bringing back Cody Bellinger, signing Shota Imanaga, who started off really, really well. For whatever reason, the last few weeks have been abysmal for Chicago. Dansby Swanson has disappeared offensively, and the glove is so-so. Cody Bellinger hasn't been that good. He just went on the IL with a broken finger, and this is really far from what the Cubs had hoped. And I think Craig Counsell is in a really tough position because he's not brought in to just be a stopgap manager and help some younger players develop. He's there to deliver some results, and that hasn't been the case so far this season. I'd be a little concerned if I was a Cubs fan at this point, especially if they show over the course of the couple series after the All-Star break that they're still playing this kind of so-so level of baseball. I would be concerned because there's a lot of investment in this team and a lot of, I guess, aspiration that this team's going to get back to where they were. So a little disappointing from the Cubs so far this year. I put them in that kind of, they're trying to be good, but not so much. The Cardinals have the same kind of thing where, you know, if you were to equate them to any other team in baseball, it would kind of be the Yankees of the National League. There is an expectation from Cardinals fans that they are going to be as good as you think they're going to be, and they're going to be relevant in the postseason every year. Well, they won 71 games last year, and there was a lot of talk about Oli Marmol kind of losing the clubhouse. There was the kind of public shaming of Tyler O'Neill very early in the season, and to me, it just felt like the Cardinals had a problem with just the general cohesion around the team. They definitely have cleaned it up this year, and the team is starting to play kind of better all around. I know Wilson Contreras has missed a lot of time, and I think him coming back should be helpful. Arenado and Goldschmidt have kind of showed us they're on the wrong side of 30 and trending in the wrong direction. I think Sonny Gray has been really, really good, but outside of that, the pitching staff has been so-so. So for me, one of the big questions with the Cardinals is what do they do at the trade deadline, especially with Arenado and Goldschmidt kind of in this state where they're not providing the same sort of value they did 3-4 years ago, but you can't just get rid of them because the contracts they're on are just not really team friendly for anyone to pick up. So I don't know what to make of the Cardinals. Here's to me a really interesting one because I'm not convinced that the Pirates were trying to be bad this year, but I'm not going to say they were trying to be really, really aggressive. I mean, they're not a big market team. They don't have the same payroll of the Phillies and the Yankees and the Dodgers, and they have a lot of really good young talent. And O'Neill Cruz missing all of last year, I think, was really big in stunting a little bit of that. They did lock up Brian Reynolds long term, and Key Brian Hayes won a Gold Glove, and of course, starting the All-Star game as a rookie in Paul Skeens. Great moment for baseball to have a young talent like he is. I'm just not convinced that the Pirates were as aggressive as other teams in the offseason at building this roster. I mean, they knew they're going to have Skeens in the majors at some point. Just the question was going to be when. He's been as good as advertised, obviously, in his first, 10 or 11 starts. Absolutely phenomenal. 7 no-hit innings the other day. They're set up for the future. I'm just not convinced that they were trying to be set up to win today. They're around 500, and having Paul Skeens in the rotation does help a lot. Again, I'm just not sure that they were trying to be as good as they are this year. And Jared Jones in the rotation has also been good. Mitch Keller just got locked up as well to a long-term extension. The Pirates are building for tomorrow, but they're definitely, I'd say, ahead of schedule. I wouldn't quite put them in the same category as like the Reds. They're hanging around, and last year they showed glimpses of that as well, being, you know, first place through the month of April. Trending in the right direction for sure. So the Mets have been a lot better as of late, and I think this whole thing with Grimace taking over and like the Grimace mania of it all has been a fun thing for Mets fans, and they've played pretty good baseball for the last little while. Still hovering around 500. They're just outside a wild card spot. So for a team that had, you know, basically resigned to not being competitive until 2025 at the earliest, like Pittsburgh, it's a step in the right direction. So it's really good place to be if you're a Mets fan and thinking kind of with rose-tinted glasses, like, yeah, we can get better. We can do this. And I think part of this has to do with David Stearns bringing in certain players on those shorter term deals to try to get marginal value in certain places. JD Martinez, I think, has been a really underrated acquisition. The pitching staff was better than we expected them to be. I think the one question with the Mets to keep an eye on is really what are they going to do with Pete Alonso, especially if they're in the wild card spots, because he's an impending free agent, but they could very easily trade him, get some value from another team's minor league system, and then re-sign him in the offseason, because they surely have the cash to do that. There's a lot of things that could happen with the Mets, and I think they're one of the more interesting teams for that reason. You don't know which way they're going to go, and it could go in one extreme or the other. It's kind of been one of those two things. It's a very up and down roller coaster type year. All right, so the next team I put in this category is definitely the Washington Nationals. And for me, pure case of they were planning on being good long term, like the Mets, but they've gotten better than expected production from some of the young players. Like CJ Abrams has had a really good year, Jacob Young, one of their young prospects, and James Wood, who just came up from the minors. Trevor Williams, before he got hurt, was having a really solid year. There was a lot of, I guess, ahead of schedule type thoughts with the Nationals. And, you know, there wasn't a thought of the Nationals being competitive this season, but like I said earlier, they're 6-2 against the Braves. So, you know, to play like that against a team a lot of people thought was going to be one of the favorites to win the World Series, it's an encouraging sign. They're on the right track. I think I'd put the Rangers in this kind of same tier as the Cubs and Cardinals, but it's a little bit of an anomaly because the Rangers won the World Series last year. So like you can't really establish that they're trying really hard to be bad. I mean, I've read they're going to be sellers at the deadline, but realistically, you know, you win 84 games, you have a chance to go to the World Series. As long as you make it in, that's what matters. And I think that's part of why the league has moved towards this expanded format, because it keeps more teams involved in the postseason race, especially late in the season. I think it's interesting though, because they're supposed to get DeGrom back later this year. So if they're out of it, they might just shut him down for all of 2024 and just look at 2025 as a year to be competitive again. Guess I would put the D-backs in this category, but they just split a series with the Braves and they've been playing better as of late. I think this time last year, they were actually tied for first going into the All-Star break with the Dodgers. For whatever reason, haven't played well this year, and part of that can be attributed to going to the World Series last year and playing with this sense of expectation. And they've made a couple moves in the offseason to get better, adding Jock Peterson, Eugenio Suarez, and Eduardo Rodriguez, who I think is yet to pitch this year. Like, I could honestly see the D-backs in that 80-win wagon category yet again, but you could also see them missing the postseason entirely. One team I forgot to add to the trying to be good is bad, the Toronto Blue Jays. A lot of chatter about the Blue Jays finally putting it all together this year and the expectations being there, but getting knocked out in the wild card round last year to the Twins and just not really showing that they were all that dangerous in the postseason the year before. I think it's definitely short of where they are trying to be, and they have a lot of money invested in this team and they just haven't produced. I mean, Vladdy hasn't been good, Bichette hasn't really been great, Springer's been so-so. Blue Jays just aren't as good as anyone thought they were going to be, myself included. So they are really trying their best to be really competitive, but they play in a good division, and to have to play the Orioles and the Yankees and the Red Sox, all of whom have legitimate chances to make the postseason, make a run in the postseason, assuming they add to their rosters. I just would not be convinced with anything the Blue Jays do between now and the end of the season. And I think it's tough because the older that Vladdy gets and the closer he gets to free agency and the closer that Bichette gets to free agency, the more their value goes down in the trade market. So if I'm the Blue Jays front office, I have to be thinking about at least entertaining an offer should one come in for a Vladdy or a Bo or anyone else in that team, really. The Tigers are an interesting one for me because they're not good, but they're good adjacent, right? If that makes sense. Like, Derek Skubal's having a Cy Young season, but they're not really getting production from anywhere else. I mean, Mark Hanna has been, I think, their best all-around offensive player this year, and he's on the wrong side of 35, I believe. So not a really great sign when that's one of your more promising offensive players. Riley Green's showed some signs of, being as good as we thought he was going to be, but not really sure. But they're not terrible. And we knew they weren't going to try to win this year. I just don't think that they thought the talent they had was ready, but they're just not quite there yet. It's not great. Not great, but it's also not terrible. So I don't really know what to make of the Tigers. They're almost good, but they're definitely, I think, of these four teams in this category, they are on the weaker side. With the Rays, I think it's interesting because we thought they were going to be, we thought as always the Rays are kind of going to be either buyers or sellers, or a little bit of both, but it looks like they're selling more so than anything. They already shipped Aaron Savali out of town, so I think it's a little bit of maximizing on some of that value, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Arozarena get traded, especially to a team that needs an outfield bat. Kind of a tough place to be because they won 99 games last year, and they got off to that huge start, 14-0 to start the year, and all of a sudden got swept by the Rangers in the wild card round, and then they've had this kind of, by their standards, pretty pedestrian start to the year. Have no issue putting him in this category. As far as teams that are also trying to aggressively be bad, the White Sox are not trying to be good. And I think the indication that they are willing to listen on offers for Luis Robert and Garrett Crochet is a little bit of an indictment of how the franchise is being run. They really are not trying to do one thing or the other. They're just really, really terrible. It's a kick in the groin for the White Sox because, 3 years ago, they were considered one of the kind of young up-and-coming teams, winning the division and going to the ALDS and getting knocked out by the Astros and having that sense of the White Sox are building something here with Luis Robert, Eloy Jimenez, and they had Tim Anderson as short as kind of their emotional leader, and then look what's happened to that. They are really trying to be bad this year, and it has worked, to their credit. They have tried, and it has worked. Same thing with the Rockies. They're trying to be bad, and it has worked. I don't have much to add on top of that. McMahon's played okay at certain points. Nolan Jones has not been great. I thought he was going to be better than he has been so far, but not a whole lot from Colorado. You could probably guess which one of these teams is going to belong to each of these tiers. We cannot talk about bad teams that are aggressively bad without talking about the Angels. Now, I don't think a team that hires Ron Washington and has Mike Trout is necessarily trying to be bad, but they are really, really bad. And Mike Trout missing most of the season, it's not a good picture. And I really feel for Angels fans who literally just lost the best player on the face of the earth to their cross-regional rivals. They're just not very good. It's not great. It's not great. I was kind of conflicted on whether or not I wanted to put the White Sox in this category as well, this Oakland A's category, but I think because of where they were last year and because of how aggressively they've kind of turned course, I have to put them in the Oakland A's category by themselves, and that's the Miami Marlins. Yuri Perez had Tommy John, Sandy Alcantara had Tommy John last year. They're heading in the wrong direction on both sides of the ball. They're going to be sellers at the deadline again. I think Jazz is probably one they're going to move, which is kind of wild to me because you would have thought, a year ago maybe, that he might be untouchable, that he might be their franchise cornerstone. It just hasn't worked out that way. And I think not giving Kim Ng the sort of influence that she deserved was the first kind of misstep for them. And ever since then, it's been all downhill. So Marlins very much in the same breath as the A's from a few years ago, where they had a good team, made the postseason, and then the next year just completely blew the whole thing up. They're heading in that direction as we get closer to the trade deadline. And that, folks, leaves one more team, the Oakland A's, going in the sell it tier, because let's be honest, all we really want is for Fisher to sell the team, driving the A's out of Oakland and bringing them to Sacramento, where they're going to consistently play in 100-degree temperatures for the vast majority of the season. It's not good for anyone, mostly the players, but it's not good for anyone. Fans, players, the league having to go there, having had to have one team go play in Vegas really not a good look for the league, not a good look for Fisher. And the only outcome really that I think would be best for the league is for Fisher to sell. So folks, that does it. That is the definitive tier list for the first half of the 2024 MLB season. Let me know what you think about it down in the comments below. I'll drop a link to the template in the description as well, so you can have a play around with your version of this tier list and let me know what you think I'm right about, wrong about, all that fun stuff. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like on it. Really helps the channel out a lot. If you enjoy this type of content as well, be sure to subscribe for more. That'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.